Give people a sense, at least in terms of Iraq, if we'll zoom in on that, there are targets all over the country, of course. There are industrial sites. There are almost 60 air bases throughout the country, about 30 of which are bases of considerable use for the Iraqis at the moment, all of which are targets for this massive armada of American, or this armada of American warplanes that everybody expected would take place when the battle began. The policy has been from the beginning to hit the Iraqis as hard as possible from the air at the very beginning and set the leadership off around Saddam Hussein, completely destabilize it if possible, get Saddam Hussein, if possible, in the view of many military people and political figures in the country as well, but also to suppress all of the Iraqi capability to mount missile attacks on U.S. forces subsequently, or for that matter to get the Iraqi Air Force off the ground and fighting. Let's go to the State Department, where our national security correspondent John McWethy is standing by. John, just add to this at leisure.
To take the lead on this. If they are hitting targets in Baghdad, it is most likely going to be the military command structure, the communications, maybe even the bridges, as they go after all the sorts of things that can make it more difficult for the command in Baghdad to send out its orders to the front lines down in Kuwait. Tactically, that's probably what they're after.
John, aren't the Iraqis to some extent in a better position because they have hard line, because they're in a defensive position, because they have hardened communications, many of which are under the ground and rather difficult to get at?
Some of their communications is hardened, some of it is microwave, Peter. So what the United States is trying to do is to disrupt the points where the hardened communications and the microwave communications would come together. And there are several of these points around Baghdad, several of these points, in fact, leading down to Kuwait. If they can hit those central communications centers, then they can cut the lines.
Okay, and of course, let's go to Bob Zelnick at the Pentagon and talk a little bit more about this, the electronic warfare, Bob, that may be waged at this very moment by the AWACS and by some of those aircraft which have a capability to blank out a lot of their communications throughout the country.
Yes, the AWACS is certainly one. The Navy has an E-6 based aboard its carriers, and remember there are 6 carriers within striking distance of these targets. There's the F-4 Wild Weasel, which can jam communications. There are any variety of aircraft that can be equipped to do that, Peter.
Okay. The clue for us as to this actually beginning were the F-15s that took off from one of the air bases in central Saudi Arabia and flew off, in the words of one of the flight mechanics there, to make history. This is history in the making, said a Colonel Ray Davis, who was maintaining these F-15s as they took off into night, disappearing in pairs off into the night sky for a flight of almost 600, little more than 600 miles from central Saudi Arabia to Baghdad. But as has been pointed out on a number of occasions, this is only a minute part of the capacity which the U.S. Air Force has. And throughout this entire run-up to today, it has always been surmised by military and political personnel in the West that the one thing Saddam Hussein and his military never completely appreciated was the full force of the American Air Force, or should I say the full force of American air power from the Air Force and from the Navy, and also from the Army being used against it. In just a minute or so from now, the President's press secretary, Marlin Fitzwater, is going to come and make a statement in the White House briefing room, and perhaps he will confirm, just in case you were just joining us, what we already know. Here's Marlin Fitzwater.
Statement by the President of the United States. The liberation of Kuwait has begun. In conjunction with the forces of our coalition partners, the United States has moved under the code name Operation Desert Storm to enforce the mandates of the United Nations Security Council. As of 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Operation Desert Storm forces were engaging targets in Kuwait and Iraq. President Bush will address the nation at 9 o'clock p.m. tonight from the Oval Office. I'll try to get you more as soon as we can. Thank you very much.
Well, very sparse details from Marlin Fitzwater, but Desert Shield has become Desert Storm, and he confirmed it started about 7 o'clock Eastern Time, that is to say American aircraft from the Persian Gulf from Saudi Arabia and perhaps from elsewhere in the Persian Gulf itself, though not from Turkey, we're told, were over their Iraqi targets, some of them having to make a considerable flight. The attack may also have involved cruise missiles, may well have involved the stealth bomber, the cruise missile, and the stealth bomber, two of America's latest pieces of high technology which have never before been tested in combat. And as Gary Shepard reported a short while ago from the Al Rashid Hotel, there was a tremendous reaction from the Iraqis on the ground. Let's go back to Gary. We can try to go back to Gary Shepard, or we cannot. Okay, so the phone line in Baghdad has, for at least the moment, been severed. Again, we're not altogether sure why that might be the case. It may be the Iraqis, though over the last couple of days, but particularly in the last 24 hours, they have given reporters much more license pretty much to say what they wanted out of there. But because, as John McCarthy pointed out a little earlier, cutting communications to Baghdad to create a sense of isolation in the country for the Iraqi military, particularly for the Iraqi military high command, was a clear intention of the U.S. military high command. Britt Hume is back at the White House. Britt, what can you add?
It occurs to me to suggest that the President's decision, while formally made tonight, was really, in fact, an order given tonight, if not earlier. And it seems to me that based on all that we now know, that the policy that has led to this was one which contemplated the possible use of force from the start, and it really has for some time been up to Saddam Hussein whether it would actually be invoked. But my sense, having watched George Bush through the long months, is that this was a decision that he recognized that he might someday come to, and that he seems not to have flinched from it. And indeed, in watching him today and yesterday and the days leading up to this, it strikes me that he's been remarkably calmer and more serene than one would have imagined if this was not something he'd been thinking about for a long time.
And Britt, though this will come nonetheless as a tremendous surprise to people all over the country and create enormous sadness and anxiety about loved ones in the Gulf, not of course to mention all of the people who may die on both sides of this, we should truly not be surprised that the President acted as quickly after the deadline as he did, should we?
I think not, Peter, and it's worth, I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that the President was so unyielding about was that this was a real deadline and that the withdrawal had to be unconditional. And I think it struck perhaps many of us from the start that it was a very tall order that he was trying to carry out here. And I think that within the politics of the Middle East, with which you're so familiar, that it might have been possible to negotiate a settlement to this situation if getting Iraq out of Kuwait was really all that was on his mind. But it has never been. My sense about this president is that he has basically staked his presidency and perhaps his place in history on this idea that he and his coalition partners can write a new set of rules for the world in the post-Cold War time, in which aggressors like Saddam Hussein can be repelled and that collective security can be real, and that this was the test case for it, and thus his unyielding stance and his early recognition that force might ultimately have to be used.
Yes, as I think Britt will say in the days ahead, we shall see. The first true indication of alarm has come, perhaps not also ironically, from the oil markets in Houston and New Orleans, which are still open at 7:10 Eastern Time, 3 o'clock in the morning Baghdad time, and oil immediately jumped $3 a barrel to $35 a barrel on those two markets. A reminder as we look back at a map of the Middle East that the United States gets a little more than 23% of its oil from the region. But that the United States, though taking the lead in all of this, is a member of a coalition because so much of the rest of the world gets so much more of its oil from there. But perhaps it is important on this particular evening, at this particular moment, to try to give you a sense of what is happening. It's going to be very difficult for us to give you a sense of what is happening in a first-hand basis. And perhaps you've all heard in the last several days that when war began, there were going to be very stringent rules imposed on the press by the U.S. military high command. It is also the middle of the night, even if we were able to see anything at the moment. And the only first-hand reporting we've actually had of battle at this moment comes from ABC's Gary Shepard in Baghdad. His line has now been cut, but he reports seeing planes approaching from the west, clearly in search of a number of military, political targets in the Baghdad area. And he's very close to the center of downtown and reports no bombs or no missiles falling in the immediate area. But as we listen, for example, to Bill Redeker, who is in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia tonight, perhaps with maps and with diagrams, we can give you some sense of the magnitude of this attack that comes at Iraq and at Kuwait, the president referring to this as the liberation of Kuwait from so many different locations with so much equipment. So, Bill Redeker, just talk at your leisure.
Well, there are a number of air bases in this country, and this was always expected to be the launch point for any air assault. We're very close to one. There's several others scattered around this nation. There are approximately 1,058, that's pretty close to being on target, I believe, combat aircraft that the U.S. itself has deployed here. They're supported by about another 150 support planes that would be carrying fuel and supplies. They have been training, obviously, since about the fourth day they arrived here. The Air Force has always maintained that it would be ready no matter what came, because they are so mobile and they can deploy so quickly. However, several additional aircraft have been brought into the theater within the last week or so. So the air deployment has been completed now for some time, with the addition of those extra planes.
And Bill, the plan has always been to go very, very heavy in the air before committing any American ground forces, right?
That's correct. I mean, that's what initially got General Dugan of the Air Force in trouble for revealing those plans, though others had speculated about it as well. That clearly is where the U.S. has an advantage over the Iraqis. We just had another fighter aircraft take off. I don't think we can see it, but we can see his afterburners behind me.
Is it, as you turn around and look off at that airbase to which you are adjacent in eastern Saudi Arabia, just to remind people, we're not going to say where people are in the main for security purposes, even though it is widely regarded that the U.S. has total command of the skies. But Bill, as you turn around there, are you seeing a lot of air activity?
Well, no, maybe we can take a look at what we're seeing. Can we turn left there a little bit beyond the domes here? We're not too far. I can't give the exact location. We're not too far from the air facility, but there's no air activity at this very moment. About an hour ago, an hour and 15 minutes ago, we counted up to 20 fighter aircraft taking off. We can tell they're fighter as opposed to cargo or commercial transport because of the afterglow that's kicked out, because of the size of them and at the speed at which they were traveling. And they were as the military says, deploying rather rapidly, one after another, and heading straight up north.
This doesn't have much to do with combat, but people are always asking me what those blue things are behind you. And as I recall from our visit to you there over Thanksgiving, that is the roof of the swimming pool behind the hotel.
Well, it's a building that's adjacent to the swimming pool. That's correct, Peter.
So nothing very significant to that, but anybody wonders what those blue things all the time, that's what they are. Bill, what sort of a defensive posture was the U.S. in tonight? You filed earlier for World News Tonight on the general goings-on out in the Gulf today, but there was concern there about an Iraqi preemptive strike, wasn't there?
There's been that concern for several days now. We discovered that it was on a heightened state yesterday with the Army. The Patriot anti-aircraft systems here were cranked up to a higher state than they normally are, although they're always on some state of alert. Today we discovered other signs that seemed to indicate that the U.S. was about to launch an attack. Certainly the Navy, which went on, one of its battleships went on DEFCOM, or defensive condition, exactly, number 2, which is the next stage, which is the second stage, rather, before going to full war alert. We also noticed that troops were being given chemical warfare atropine kits, the antidotes for chemical warfare. They have all been asked to ship back any incidentals. They've been moving forward during the entire, well, I suppose about the last 5 days, but we noticed some of that activity today as well. And also some of the fighter aircraft that we also talked about earlier this evening were being armed and loaded. So there were several indications today that seemed to indicate that it was going beyond the normal sort of exercise training that we've become so accustomed to in the last 5 months. It truly seemed like they were getting very ready tonight.
Okay, Bill, obviously, please don't go away. We want to go to Washington now to talk to one of our resident military analysts who knows the Iraqis well and has been paying particular attention today to the configuration of the opening round in the battle. Tony Cordesman is standing by in our Washington bureau. Tony, you also have a map in front of you. Feel free to use it as you want and give us your own sense, based on your own intelligence, of what you think is going on at the moment.
Peter, I think the most important thing is to understand the scale of this. If they're attacking Baghdad, they're probably attacking the outskirts. Military communications do not go through the center of Baghdad except to the presidential palace. There are numerous underground command sites at least 5 where Saddam Hussein could be. The key ones are on the outskirts of Baghdad and down near Basra, but there are also underground command sites that they conquered in Kuwait. In addition to that, if
Can I stop you there for a second,
Sure.
Tony? Isn't it most unlikely that Saddam Hussein would be in Kuwait tonight?
I think it is very unlikely. If he's anywhere, it would be the outskirts of Baghdad or probably somewhere near Basra, which is the key point in terms of his military control in the south. But there are many other points there, Peter, and as John pointed out earlier, there are many landline communications. What is really vulnerable throughout all of Iraq and throughout Kuwait are major radars used to try to acquire our aircraft. They must have those radars to both acquire them, to use their own fighters, and to use their major surface-to-air missiles. There are approximately 250 surface-to-air missile launchers, major ones, that we may be attacking right now.
Stop on radar for a second for me, because isn't this where we have an advantage, or the U.S. has an advantage with the stealth bomber and the Tomahawk missile? Stand by for a sec, Tony. We're going to go back to Dhahran. Bill?
Peter, air raid sirens, or at least air warning sirens, I should point out, went off about 15 seconds ago. Perhaps we can hear those in the background. Are they winding down now? Can you hear that? There they go again.
Bill,
I don't assume this is purely precautionary. We've seen no air activity other than that's taken off out of here earlier this evening. But
nor do I
in the
want
background, perhaps you can hear that.
I don't want to be melodramatic about it either, but you are, our audience perhaps doesn't know, but you and I know, you are within range, aren't you, of Iraqi missiles?
That's correct. There are more sirens going off now. We are within range of Scud missiles, though the accuracy of those missiles is not terribly reliable.
Is there a lot of activity elsewhere at the moment? Just talk on about what you see and hear nearby you.
Well, I see people being ordered out of this area right now, Peter, and people are putting on gas masks and being ordered out.
Bill, it's your call, whatever you want to do anytime. Do you want to stay or do you want to go?
I haven't seen any do you want to show us what's going on over here, please? I haven't seen any incoming air activity at this point. The sirens have gone up and down. We also see some trucks going out on the highway.
All right, Bill, just to be totally clear about this, at any time you wish to leave us, you leave us. Well, what we lost there was the satellite from the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. And again, this is one of the things that we anticipated might happen. And one of the reasons this might happen, let's go back to Tony Cordesman in Washington and talk about the electronic capability to blank out the whole area. But though quickly, Tony, saying before you begin, I apologize for talking on here, that in this particular instance it was a power failure which knocked Bill Redeker off the air. So Tony, talk a little bit about that as well, please.
Well, obviously, the power plants are critical to the operations there. There are not that many major power plants, but there are some very central power plants. If those go out, then much of the radar and communications would be degraded, although most of those have separate generators. They do have electric jamming capabilities to suppress those radars. The fact that F-15s seem to have gone into the area indicates we're using active jamming. Our stealth aircraft can't be detected by their radars. With 2,000-pound bombs, they can knock the major radars out. Sea-launched cruise missiles coming from the Gulf can strike at those radars and at the command posts necessary to use them, knocking them out again. At the same time, we can bring in large numbers of aircraft, hitting the surface-to-air missiles and creating corridors, gaps through that allow us to attack other targets. Now, Peter, one thing we have to remember is that there are some 50 to 70 Scud missile launch sites scattered throughout Iraq. Those have to be a critical target to ensure that those can't be used against Saudi Arabia, our forces, or against Israel or any other ally in the coalition.
I was going to make that point earlier about the Scud missiles in the western part of Iraq. They're pointed at Israel. We have been told that the Israeli military is going to make some kind of a statement in the next few minutes. They've delayed it a bit, though. Tony, put your finger on where those Scud missiles are and give us some sense of distance between there and Israel. Isn't it about 250 miles?
Well, it is, and they can reach Israel. But although there are reports of 2 sites in this area here, there may well be many more sites. It's not quite clear. What is fairly clear that is the missiles that can reach Israel are relatively limited in number and relatively limited in payload. At the same time, what one has to worry about is they're using their Su-24, a very modern Soviet fighter bomber, equipped with chemical bombs and perhaps trying to make one desperate raid to penetrate Israeli airspace at the same time they use those missiles.
Let us go back and use a bit of history as you talk on here, Tony. The last violence we've experienced, of course, is the U.S. raid on Libya. How did American technology perform then? On the basis of that, what are you expecting tonight?
Well, American technology did not perform perfectly in Libya. We had a serious problem with the F-111s. They had never been used before in combat, and we only got about 50% of the damage expectancy that we had hoped for. On the other hand, Navy aircraft performed almost perfectly. The key, however, was that that had to be improvised very quickly under the worst possible circumstances in terms of refueling. The forces here have had 4 months in which to test much of this attack plan, and they have validated their concepts with tests in the United States and elsewhere to make sure that these systems will work reasonably well.
I think we're going to have to perhaps talk about one missile system or one weapon system at a time. Talk about the Scud missile now. This is the missile which was, among other things, used by the Iraqis and by the Iranians in the War of the Cities which they fought during the 8-year-long war that the Iraqis and Iranian field. It's a Soviet weapon. There are 2 versions, aren't there, Tony? There's an SS-1 Scud and a Scud-B, which is more sophisticated.
That's right. Those are the 2 Soviet versions. Now, in addition to that, the Iraqis have 2 other versions. The El Hussein, which was the only system that had the range to reach Tehran in Iran. It wasn't until they developed that system with improved range that they could reply to the Iraqi attacks. Since that time, they've developed another system, which is sometimes called the El Abas or the El Abed, which has significantly greater payload and may have significantly greater range. That system is particularly dangerous if it has chemical warheads, because it could possibly, at least, carry enough chemical warheads to do serious damage to a city in Saudi Arabia, potentially to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, or to even targets in Turkey, although that seems an unlikely scenario.
Okay, Tony, stand by for a second. Tony Cordesman, who is one of our leading military analysts in the country, will be with us throughout the evening. He will be with us for the duration. I want to go to Capitol Hill in just a minute to talk to ABC's Jim Wooten, but before we do, I'd like to play a little bit of the tape from Gary Shepard in the Al Rashid Hotel in Baghdad, which was the very first hint any of us had tonight that anything was going on. We were talking to him on the phone at the time.
Peter, I am looking directly west from our hotel now, and throughout the entire sky there are flashes of light. It appears to be some sort of anti-aircraft fire, a couple of flashes on the horizon now. Something is definitely underway here. Something is going on. The whole sky lit up with these flashes continually.
Is it far in the distance, Gary?
Occurring, and now we can see an obvious tracers in the sky. Planes now coming toward this hotel, and flashes. The sound of flak and flares. Obviously, an attack is underway of some sort. It appears that there is tracer fire coming up from the ground, and an incredible panorama of flashes continuing as I speak.
How close is it to the city where you are, Gary?
We now see an entire stream of red tracer fire. And now sirens, air raid sirens, are beginning to sound over Baghdad. The lights of the city itself continue to burn on the ground. Street lights, house lights. And as this occurs, the flashes continue throughout the sky. There's obviously an air raid underway right now. The air raid sirens continuing. We see more tracer fire going up. Huge flashes in the sky. throughout the sky.
Gary?
Yes, Peter.
Gary Shepard talking to us a while ago. The very first hint we had at all that what the president calls the liberation of Kuwait had actually begun. Those first American aircraft took off. I had the time here just a moment ago, but I've lost it. I'll come back to it. And flew to Baghdad, where it is now 3:27 in the morning and the battle fully underway. One of the early concerns, Tony Cordesman made a reference there to the concern, as everybody's expressed it over the last several weeks and months, that there might be an attack on Israel. ABC's Dean Reynolds is standing by in Jerusalem. Dean, can you give us any hint from there of what is going on?
Peter, it's quiet here. I would say almost still this evening. We are awaiting an announcement from the Army. So far, there have been no air raid sirens. The radio has, in fact, been repeating some of the broadcasts made by Gary Shepard from Baghdad. The sense here is one of very low profile. They're maintaining that low profile to stay out of this conflict. As we look out on the Jerusalem skyline, we see nothing but the normal lights of the evening. And from our other ABC personnel around the country, also nothing out of the ordinary.
You're able to monitor radio from there fairly effectively throughout the Middle East. Are you picking up anything from the Arab world?
Not so far, Peter. We have, as you know, reported that Radio Baghdad was being jammed. Was knocked off the air, exactly. But we have not heard anything specific from the other parts of the Arab world, although we are monitoring it.
Okay, thanks very much, Dean Reynolds in Jerusalem. Please stand by. The first I finally found those figures. The first F-15 took off from central Saudi Arabia at 4:50 p.m. New York time, which was 50 minutes past midnight in the Gulf. And they would have taken a couple of hours, an hour and a half perhaps, to get, no, big part, an hour to get from there to Baghdad. And those are the targets that we are specifically aware they have been hitting, the airport and the missile installations around Baghdad, because we heard that from Gary Shepard. We have been hearing from Tony Cordesman, one of our military analysts, that they are assumedly hitting all over the country. Also joining us from Boston is General Bernard Trainer, who's also going to be a resident military analyst for us for the duration of this war. General Trainer, what are your first thoughts?
Well, Peter, I think this is probably the start of a massive air campaign. I would suspect there's probably between 400 to 600 aircraft in this initial wave. The very interesting thing was that the air raid sirens in Baghdad did not sound until after your reporter on the scene gave an indication of anti-aircraft fire. And I think this indicates that the first wave, or the first strikes into Baghdad, were probably by the stealth aircraft, and they didn't pick them up until the explosions began. Now, with regard to targets, particularly in view of the fact that they lost their communications out of Baghdad, I would suspect one of the principal targets that the stealth was after was the electrical grid, the communications grid, which allowed Baghdad to communicate and produce electricity. So at this point, I think the game plan to electronically cripple the Iraqis is well underway.
Just to remind our audience, or to tell our audience, in case you haven't seen General Trainer with us before, that he's had as much experience as any senior American military officer with the Iraqis. You spent about 6-7 months with the Iraqi military, didn't you?
No, it was about 2 months.
I beg your pardon, 2 months with them. But in listening to you earlier today, we talked a little bit about their preparedness. If the air raid sirens didn't work, as you say, they didn't, and we didn't hear them for quite some time, are you surprised?
Nope, not at all. The stealth aircraft are designed to do exactly that. They would be going after targets such as command and control and electrical grids to dominate the communications network of the Iraqis. I wouldn't figure that the stealth aircraft would be going after anti-aircraft missiles. The other aircraft, which will follow and surely are in the air at this point, will be going after that sort of target.
Give us a sense, General Trainer, of how much is in the air at the moment and where you think it may be just in terms of flying time.
Well, I'm just assuming that we can generate a rate of about 2,000 attacks in a 24-hour period, given the number of aircraft that we have over there. And if we've just launched this sort of thing, just a ballpark estimate would be that would be something in the vicinity from, as I've indicated, probably 400 to 600 aircraft striking targets not only in Iraq but also in Kuwait. And these would be, I would assume, primarily at targets which would allow the Iraqis to control their anti-air defenses, things like their radars, things like their communications, and the preliminary indications seem to bear that out.
Okay, General Trainer, stand by for a second. We're going to go to overseas now to London, where ABC's chief foreign correspondent Pierre Salinger is standing by. We have indeed lost communications not only from Baghdad at the moment, but also from eastern Saudi Arabia. In the case of Saudi Arabia, we're not sure whether that's a result of something more than a power failure. As Bill Rediker was standing there, out not very far from the ABC News offices, the air raid sirens went. The ABC News office is quite close to an operating military airfield. So we'll try to keep you up to date as to what may be happening in that particular location of eastern Saudi Arabia. But from now, we are, as we always suspected we would be, going to be listening to this from the fringes and trying to analyze it from the fringes, in some cases at great distance, for some considerable period of time. Pierre Salinger in London.
Yeah, well, Peter, you're very accurate because now we're being cut off from the real information coming out of that area, although we have heard already that there have been 3 waves of U.S. air attacks by F-15 aircraft, among other things. And those attacks have been going against not only Baghdad, but also against certain Iraqi positions in Kuwait. Other than that, we have heard that there is, of course, an alert inside Saudi Arabia, sirens in Riyadh, in Dhahran, people going into bomb shelters. And that is the situation as we know now. We don't have many more details.
Okay, Pierre, thanks very much. Anything you can pick up from elsewhere in the Middle East, to Syria in particular, and Egypt. Syria and Egypt, both members of the international coalition. And though there was never any thought that Syria and Egypt would be involved in the first wave of attack against Iraq and against occupied Kuwait, in some cases Arab forces and certainly French forces and British forces on the ground are farther forward, closer to the Iraqi positions, than are many Americans. Let's go to Washington again. ABC's Jim Wooten is on Capitol Hill. Jim.
Well, Peter, speaking of the periphery of this whole thing, I think I am on one of the peripheries of this story, but I can tell you that the leadership of the Congress on the House side, Speaker Foley and Minority Leader Michael, and on the Senate side, Minority Leader Dole and the Senate Majority Leader Mitchell, are all watching now on television, as I assume most of America is. One of the interesting things to note was this afternoon, in this age of cellular phones and electronic marvels, that when the president tried to reach the Speaker of the House, Mr. Foley, to tell him that this was about to happen, he couldn't be reached. He was at Brooks Brothers buying shirts. It's also interesting to note that on the floor of the House today, Representative Henry Gonzalez, who is something of a figure in the House by being chairman of the House Banking Committee, introduced a resolution with 5 articles of impeachment against President Bush. I can tell you that, like most of the stories that will come from Congress in the next few days, that will soon be forgotten.
Jim, you are, I think, saying that now that it has begun, the Congress is going to simply line up lock solid behind the president?
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. There will be, I think, in private conversations, remonstrations against the president by those who voted against the resolution authorizing him to do what he has done this evening. But in public, you will hear nothing but support.
And it will, of course, also be support for American forces of the Gulf, which for many politicians will be infinitely more important than support for the president.
Exactly.
Okay. What do I recall, Jim, that a couple of congressmen have sons in the Persian Gulf, just 2?
As far as I know, Peter, there are 2. There is a congressman from California, I believe, who has a Marine who is there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jim. Please don't go away, or at least continue to work the beat, because we'll want to come back to you. Most people, I think, in the country know at this point now that there is a considerable portion of the American business and political elite which has no direct involvement in the Gulf, like so much of America in the Midwest, particularly in the South, has. I'm recalling that the other night when we were doing a report about this, we phoned around to 20 major American corporations quite haphazardly, quite at random, and found not one CEO had a son or a daughter in the Gulf. And let us now move on to the military campaign. Dean Reynolds in Jerusalem. Dean.
The Army has just put out an announcement to the Israeli public it is that due to the the apparent attack of the American forces in the Gulf, citizens of Israel are asked to open their gas mask kits and to stay at home and to keep the kits with them at all times. They are asking...
Yeah, there's an electrical problem everywhere. So we lose Dean Reynolds in Jerusalem. There he is back again. Dean, continue.
I was saying, Peter, that they are asking essential workers to report for their jobs this morning to continue maintain a level of service, to also carry their gas masks. But it is not a state of emergency. They have not declared a state of emergency. This is typical...
Really precaution. And there has, as I said earlier, there has been no air raid siren, and the place is still. It is quiet. They are doing what any country that has been named as a target by Saddam Hussein would do once the hostilities have erupted as they did this evening.
Okay, this is also true, of course, about eastern Saudi Arabia. Let's take a look at the big Middle East map again and try to give you some sense of the distances there tonight. The night sky, it's the middle of the night, absolutely the middle of the night in the Middle East. 3:30 in the morning in Baghdad, and 3:30 in the morning, I think, in Israel as well. I don't think there may be an hour time change, but I'm not sure there is. But everywhere it is certainly dark. There is no serious first light yet. The sky cleared up earlier this evening. There was a pretty heavy fog, which American military personnel said at one point the Air Force would have no trouble flying through. But if we can stop right there on the map and then come back out again, you'll get some sense of the military assets which are already involved in this war and some of the distances. From Tel Aviv to the Iraqi border, from about where Dean Reynolds was speaking to where some of the first Iraqi missiles might indeed be deployed, is only about 250 miles. And if you look there at the Persian Gulf, where there were two American carriers tonight, the Ranger and the Midway, I think, are the two American carriers in the Gulf on the right there now. Up from there, up to Baghdad and various targets, is about 300, 400 miles in some cases to targets in Iraq and in Kuwait. From Kuwait City all the way down, right down to the Strait of Hormuz, is about 500 miles. So all of those aircraft carriers, both on the left in the Red Sea, you can see 4 American carriers there. That's the configuration as of a little earlier today. 4 American carriers in the Red Sea on the western side of Saudi Arabia, and 2 in the Persian Gulf, where Iraq and Iran and Saudi Arabia and all the other Emirates and Kuwait come together. There are a lot of attack aircraft on board those particular carriers. And in fact, let's go to our Pentagon correspondent, Bob Zelnick, who's standing by, because he can bring us up to date a little, I think, on the capability of the attack aircraft from on board those aircraft carriers. Bob, normally, as I recall, only about 25% of an aircraft carrier's airplanes are used for attacking, but there are many more available at the moment, right?
Yes, the A6 is certainly one of the principal ones there, Peter, and altogether there are about 425 combat aircraft available to be used in this attack. We expect to have more details of this and specific details just after the President speaks, Peter, because Secretary Cheney and General Colin Powell, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, are going to conduct their own briefing at that time. I might add that one of the principal worries of the United States military in the field and at the Pentagon has failed to materialize, and that is the fear that Iraq would somehow succeed in hitting Israel before the U.S. and its allies joined the fight against Iraq. That could have cost the U.S. its Arab support. They were very, very worried about that. It apparently has not happened.
Not happened as of now, anyway, Bob Zelnick. Thank you very much. And as best we can tell, the attack on Iraq began maybe 45 minutes ago. It's now 7:41 Eastern Time, 3:41 in the morning in Baghdad. The President is going to talk in about an hour and 20 minutes from now. Brit Hume at the White House.
Now told that speech is expected to last about 10 to 12 minutes, and that the President has worked his way through something like 4 drafts of it. I've heard from other people here that the speechwriters have been on almost 24-hour duty for days and are absolutely bleary-eyed with exhaustion, and in part that's because they've had to work on differing drafts without any real knowledge of exactly what's going to happen. The president is said, however, to have been at work on these various drafts for several days, which goes back to the point you and I were talking about earlier, that he has obviously been contemplating this for some time. He's between 6 and 7 is when he made his calls to the leaders, we're told, and he did it from the small study adjacent to the Oval Office, and he had Vice President Quayle, National Security Advisor Scowcroft, and his Chief of Staff, Governor Sununu, with him when he made those calls. He's also called some foreign leaders, a list of those to come later.
Okay, Britt, thanks very much. A number of people, obviously, politicians and statespersons of all persuasion are going to want to talk within the next 24 hours. The Kuwaiti ambassador to the United Nations has made a statement in which he says the military action fulfills the wish of the international community to liberate Kuwait from the Iraqi aggression, and he wishes victory for this operation. It used to be called Desert Shield when it was a standing operation defending Saudi Arabia against any further Iraqi aggression and perhaps waiting for offensive action. Now that it is a war, the president is calling it Operation Desert Storm. The Secretary General of the United Nations, who made that last ill-fated attempt to try to talk Saddam Hussein into a political settlement, has also expected to make some statements a little later this evening. But you will recall, if you were watching or listening to the reporting over the last several days, he came back extremely depressed. In the words of ABC's David Ensor, who flew back from Europe with him, Saddam Hussein seemed much more concerned about offering tea and coffee to the Secretary General than engaging in any kind of a dialogue at all with the Secretary General. And there are people, by the way, those who know Saddam Hussein better than most, not that many people know him very well at all, who believe that one of the things in his mind is to try to get this battle started, to say to the Iraqi people and his other supporters in the Middle East and elsewhere in the developing world that he has stood up to the American imperialists, and then perhaps try to sue for some kind of peace before his country is totally obliterated. That is, if you believe that the American military and the other 25 nations aligned against him in the Gulf are capable of doing the damage which so many military planners have said they are capable of doing. Britt Hume at the White House again. Britt.
Peter, just one brief further thing. We've been trying to get some sense of the nature of this attack, whether this is a preliminary attack with limited goals or whether this is all out. And spokesman Fitzwater simply would tell us that the attack will be, and is being, swift and massive. Swift and massive, his words.
Okay, Britt Hume, thank you very much. We said earlier that the price of oil on the Houston and New Orleans markets, which were still open about a half hour ago, had jumped $3 a barrel immediately on the news that America had gone to war against Iraq. They're now at $35 a barrel. The Tokyo stock market, which is perhaps as sensitive to political and military happenings as any in the world, has fallen by almost 1.5%. It is down 300 points at the moment. War has begun between the United States and Iraq. I say the United States and Iraq because we are not yet sure that other members of the coalition, namely the British and the French, who have an air capability, have engaged in this initial assault against Kuwait and against Iraq. But that is news to come. We will go away and try to pull in some more information over the next 3 minutes, so we will be back after this and a word from your local ABC station. We hope you'll stay with us.
Now you can ask Angela Lansbury about Bufferin.
Angela, for a tough headache, is Bufferin really strong aspirin?
Oh, my, yes. I've learned extra strength Bufferin has the strongest dose of aspirin you can buy, 1,000 milligrams.
Miss Lansbury, how can Bufferin be so strong if it has buffers?
I wondered myself, till I heard that the buffers don't weaken it. They just help prevent aspirin stomach upset. I depend on Bufferin.
Shouldn't you discover the strength of Bufferin?
Up to here with antacid taste.
Then get great flavor up to here with extra strength Maalox Plus Cherry Cream. Up to here with mint cream. Up to here with lemon Swiss cream.
Maalox, you're the best.
It's the strongest, best tasting antacid.
Now the 6 o'clock report. Washington. We can't work unless you take something for that cold.
I took that.
Not that kind. Take Contac.
Here all the
Contac is different.
With 600 tidy Tide pills, Contac is different.
Contac lasts for 12 hours, up to 3 times longer than ordinary cold medicine, so there's a whole day's work in every Contac. And now the 11 o'clock report.
There's a whole day's work in every Contac.
Right now, we're all concerned with the outbreak of war in the Gulf. Monitoring the world 24 hours a day. Stay with the experience of ABC News.
Back when I was a boy, Mom made a country fried steak that was so good we couldn't wait to sit down to supper. I always thought we should have one just like it at Wendy's.
Introducing Wendy's 99-cent country fried steak. 100% beef, lightly breaded and cooked golden brown. It's new on the 99-cent super value menu.
You can take the boy out of the country, but he still has to eat.
Try the new 99-cent country fried steak only on Wendy's super value menu.
AM 650 WSM is Nashville's weather station. When it's going to rain, sleet, blow, or snow, you need to know instantly. AM 650 WSM with staff meteorologist Alan Archer and in-studio color radar 24 hours a day. And with Richard Thomas, exclusive Flight 650 traffic reports for road conditions, school and business closings. Nashville's weather station, AM 650 WSM. Depend on it.
Who else could do it? Who else could give you meats this light with all the delicious flavor of the South? Only Bryan. Introducing Bryan Light. 85% fat-free, a whole assortment of plump, juicy hot dogs, great-tasting bologna, and tender sausages that are all 85% fat-free. You see, Bryan just trimmed the fat, not the flavor. New Bryan Light, 85% fat-free, with all the flavor of the South.
You're watching WKRM-TV, Channel 2.
ABC News coverage of the Gulf War continues. Once again from New York, Peter Jennings.
I want to bring you up to date as best we can, and it is difficult, and it is going to be difficult. But what we know is this. About 50 minutes ago, American aircraft and perhaps American missiles, perhaps including the Tomahawk cruise missiles fired from the Persian Gulf, suddenly descended on Iraq and occupied Kuwait out of a very dark but very clear night sky. The war in the Persian Gulf has begun. What was known for so long as Operation Desert Shield is now called by President Bush Desert Cloud, Desert Storm, I beg your pardon, he made a statement from the White House a short while ago simply saying the liberation of Kuwait has begun. We expect to hear from the President in person to address the nation in about an hour and 10 minutes from now. We have no sense whatsoever of an Iraqi response or an Iraqi retaliation other than in some very early reporting, the earliest reporting from ABC's Gary Shepard, that there was a fierce defense made by anti-aircraft artillery on the western outskirts of Baghdad. So, as we have long suspected, the communications and command installations on the western edge of Baghdad were at the very least targets, including the missile batteries on the outskirts of the city and the international and military airfields there. There was, of course, very early concern that Saddam Hussein, who today assumed complete command of all the Iraqi military, we're not sure altogether what that means, but it was announced in Baghdad today, threatened to attack Israel the moment the war began, but there is no indication, according to ABC's Dean Reynolds, from Israel that there has been any move against Israel whatsoever. In eastern Saudi Arabia, where ABC's news offices are located, we were talking to ABC's Bill Redeker when the air raid sirens went off there, and all of the ABC News personnel and a number of the other civilian personnel, perhaps all of them, as best we can tell, adjacent to an airbase in eastern Saudi Arabia, have been told to go to air raid shelters, at least for the moment. Sirens have gone off throughout Saudi Arabia. In Riyadh, the capital, we can take perhaps a look at a map there, and in Dhahran, we have known of the air raid sirens going off, but do not have a full sense as to how the civilian population is responding. On the phone from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, which is the location of the U.S. military's high command, is ABC's Barry Dunsmore. Barry, go ahead.
Well, Peter, we are not hearing any information whatsoever from the high command at the moment, although, as you pointed out, this is the spot for the Joint Information Bureau. So far, they have referred us to the White House and the Pentagon. But at some point, perhaps we will be able to get additional information. As far as the situation in Riyadh is concerned, about 20 minutes ago or so, we did have air raid sirens going. And as we had been told that we were well outside the range of aircraft, if air raid sirens were to go here, it was the possibility of a missile attack. and there is some possibility that those missiles could be carrying chemical weapons. Therefore, most of the people with ABC News and the other networks who are here in Riyadh have suited up into their anti-chemical and nuclear and biological warfare suits with their gas masks handy. Those sirens that alerted us to the possibility of some kind of attack have stopped, and so at this point we are not really certain what to expect next.
Barry, what happens at the moment in terms of command? Does General Norman Schwarzkopf, the supreme American commander in the region, take control, or do the Saudis have control?
Well, as you well know, this has been one of the touchy issues throughout this entire 5-month running-up period. I think it's reasonable to assume that General Schwarzkopf is running the show, and I'm sure he is doing everything he can to keep the Saudis in the picture and make them part of it. But clearly, with the more than 400,000 U.S. troops here and the fact that the United States would be in the running of the attack, as it were, General Schwarzkopf can be assumed to be in command.
Barry, do you have any sense whatsoever of how the Saudi Arabian civilian population has responded to the beginning of war? Can you look out your window and see anything? It's what, almost 4 o'clock in the morning?
Well, it's almost 4 o'clock in the morning, and we don't see very much from the windows here, Peter. There are some people who are planning to venture out and take a look. I can tell you that today there has been, a fairly high level of anxiety, but certainly I don't think anything approaching panic. They are quite stoic about it in many cases, saying, if God wills it, they will be fine, and if God doesn't will it, they won't. I think that basically the Saudis, particularly, for a long, long time have assumed that this day would never happen, that somehow they would be rescued Deus Ex Machina and everything would be fine. So it's perhaps a little premature to predict what their reaction is going to be now that war has actually begun.
Okay, thanks very much, Barry. As you point out, the Saudis have been fairly calm throughout this whole thing, saying the Americans will protect us. So as Barry points out, hearing the air raid sirens in Riyadh, which is about, looking at my chart, about 616 miles to Baghdad, but less to Kuwait, about 332 miles to Kuwait. It's a very long range, as Barry Dunsmore points out, and as one of our military analysts, Tony Cordesman, has pointed out, the Soviet or even the Iraqi refined Scud missile, one of their heavy range missiles, is an inaccurate weapon over such considerable distance, and of course has a very reduced payload. That is to say, how much it can carry, but when it is carrying chemical weapons, which of course is everybody's great fear in the region, it needn't be very heavy at all. Ironically, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral William Crowe, who knows the region so well, was saying to us some time ago the very obvious: it is not a dangerous weapon unless, of course, it lands anywhere adjacent to you. And then anything, no matter how heavy or how light its payload is obvious. Back to the White House and Britt Hume.
Surfacing here, Peter, about the decision to do this, how it was made and when it was made. We're told now that the president had decided on this date, and it was set by virtue of the military's priorities, according to military priorities, several days ago, before it was clear whether there'd be some last-minute move by Iraq to comply with the deadline, and that indeed the statement that was read here tonight in the president's name was written yesterday. The president is said to have been watching news reports on the air tonight and to have seen these first reports, which may indeed, and I believe were the ones that we broadcast, and to have remarked to those sitting with him in the little study there that the air raid over Baghdad was happening just according to the schedule, and that was the first word. The first word he had heard in the sense of news reports was this evening as he was sitting in the room where he had called the congressional leaders with his top aides.
Okay, Britt, thanks very much. We'll be coming back to you. It is now called Operation Desert Storm. It is an American operation at the outset, but ABC's Pierre Salinger is standing by in London. Pierre, my apologies. Do we think the British have joined this initial phase of the operation?
Yes, we now have confirmation, Peter, from the British Ministry of Defense that the British are involved, that Tornado aircraft are involved in the air raids on Iraq and on Iraqi positions in Kuwait.
The air raid siren here is going off again. General alarm.
Okay, that's an interruption from Barry Dunsmore, who is in Riyadh, who says the air raid siren is going off again. Barry, continue.
I just said that the air raid sirens here in Riyadh have begun to go off again. And as I indicated earlier, the instructions we have had are to get into our suits.
Which you sound like you're doing at the moment, are you?
I think, well, in fact, I've got it on. And I've got my mask handy.
If you feel like putting it on, Barry, it's more important that you feel that you put that on if you want to than that you talk to us. So it's your call, as always. Perhaps we'll go away from Barry Dunsmore for just a moment now and let him have a couple of moments to consider his own situation, as people throughout the Persian Gulf are considering their situation tonight. Want to talk a little bit about the difficulty of mounting a night operation such as this. There are so many components to what we are talking about tonight, and there are so many families all over America and families all over Europe and the Arab world who have people in the Gulf, whether they're members of the armed forces or in the case of many Arab Americans, they are civilians within the line of fire tonight, for whom this is quite an horrendous night. And there is simply no way to minimize the sense of catastrophe that people in this country and elsewhere feel now that Operation Desert Storm has actually begun. We take it as our role at this moment to keep you up to date with all of the political and social and military components of the developing battle. There are in the night sky tonight in various parts of the Persian Gulf American aircraft. We have a brief report now from ABC's Dennis Trout on just how difficult it is for American pilots to fight under these conditions, even unopposed.
On a clear day, anyone can see forever in the desert. But on a clear night...
Oh, we own the night. We own the night.
On a clear night, special nighttime vision equipment means that U.S. forces can see forever then too, or almost forever. U.S. forces are expected to have an enormous advantage in combat with Iraq. That's because new technology allows Americans to do much of the fighting at night, when they can see, and presumably, the Iraqis cannot.
We consider the night warfare capabilities, both in the air and on the ground, of our forces to be a tremendous advantage militarily.
One system used in the Gulf is called Lantern. Seen here in tests in Arizona, Lantern uses a combination of infrared and radar technology that turns night into day. The result is plain to see. Pilots can fly extremely close to the ground without crashing, then find and destroy enemy targets with startling accuracy.
It is the most advanced, the best in the tactical fighter business that I've ever experienced.
American commanders are eager for much of the fighting to happen at night, when U.S. aircraft would be far less vulnerable to handheld Iraqi missiles. When the U.S. bombed Libya in 1986 in response to terrorist attacks, the raid came at night. So did the invasion of Panama in 1989, when night-flying helicopters attacked military facilities and transported special operations forces. U.S. helicopters can fly at night when pilots wear special night vision goggles, which take existing light, such as from the moon or stars, and amplify it several thousand times. But using all this high-tech equipment can be something of a high-wire act. Experts caution that what looks so promising in training often can fail in a real war. Dennis Trout, ABC News, the Pentagon.
Dennis Trout on one of the aspects of tonight's fighting. We heard earlier from ABC's Jim Wooten and from Brit Hume that President Bush had, shortly before 7 o'clock this evening, in fact, a little bit before that, had spoken to the political leadership up on the Hill, and the Democratic the Democratic leader in the Senate, Senator Byrd, had this to say after he'd spoken to the President. Okay. Well, we have it somewhere, and as I'm sure you'd expect, in the early stages of this coverage, there is a lot bound to go wrong, technically. It happens almost all the time. Before we go back to the Middle East, and we're trying to reestablish contact with Gary Shepard at the Al Rashid Hotel in Baghdad, where it's a little after 4 o'clock in the morning, let me go to Tony Cordesman, one of our two military analysts, and pick up a little bit, if I may, Tony Cordesman, there where Dennis Trout left off on the difficulties of flying at night. It is widely regarded as having been a big plus and an advantage for Americans, but it always looks easier on videotape than it really is, doesn't it?
It always does, Peter, but I think we have to stress that at this point it is not the attack aircraft that have to fly low to the ground which are going to be doing the attack, but aircraft designed for the night that are flown constantly at night. The F-117 is a night aircraft. That's its mission. The F-15E is one of the most sophisticated night attack aircraft in the world, and that has been tested now for several years and works superbly. In addition to that, many of the carrier aircraft have excellent night warfare capability, particularly the A-6s. So we are dealing with aircraft flying at higher altitudes against fixed targets, where these targets are well known in general from photo reconnaissance. And they should be able to conduct this phase of the night war with great effectiveness.
Now, there's a lot of talk about all sorts of people having night glasses that they never had before, a new development. We've seen them used on the ground as well. Aren't they also somewhat disorienting for the people who are wearing them, even if they've had some training?
Well, they can be somewhat disorienting, but in fact, the overall performance using those goggles with helicopters has been relatively good. The Marines use them in their AV-8s, the night units that are equipped in that aircraft. It's a V-stall fighter, one that can take off straight up. They too have done very well. At this point in time, however, there won't be aircraft using those night vision devices. This will be a matter of radar and long-range infrared like the Lantern system.
I want to bring General Traynor in here for a second, because there's also been some talk, General Traynor. In fact, you were the one who really emphasized it. Are you there in Boston?
I am indeed.
I can have a look at you. Thank you. Always makes me feel better. You were the one who made the point that because the air raid warnings seem to be lagging behind an attack in Baghdad, that perhaps what was being used was a stealth bomber.